Hello and welcome to a special episode of our draft series. This is one that we try to do towards the draft every single year. Our little tandem mock draft. John and I will alternate picks as we go through the first round. Full disclosure: we are recording this on Monday night, so if a trade happens between now and then, if intel comes out about a team's target with one of the early selections, that will not be factored into this. So we're definitely this will be more of a guess for a lot of these picks than it is anything that has been reported at this point. But John, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is always kind of a fun exercise to explore what could potentially happen on Thursday night. It's one of my favorite days of the year, and I know that you're looking forward to it as well.
Yep. Yeah, I do think that, like you said, these can sometimes inform some things about how the draft may potentially fall. I remember, I guess I can't remember if Christian Gonzalez was a rookie last year or 2 years ago, but I remember when we did that mock, we had him falling to like 22, and as we were doing it, they're like, "There's no way he's going to fall this far. Like, this makes no sense." And then he actually fell very far that night, and the Patriots ended up stealing him. I think at like 18
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. And so sometimes like these exercises can kind of inform you on team needs and like what they may prioritize, and you can start to get a better understanding of what the range for these guys is, outside of just like the type of players that people have them evaluated as. So I agree. I think it can be a very informative exercise. We will alternate. So I am going to have the odds so that I get to pick for the Ravens. That's how we always do it. Whichever number the Ravens are at, that's what I will do. And John will take the evens. Anything else, John? You want
Because I
to?
have no team affiliation.
Yeah, yeah. Anything else you want to add before we get started?
No, let's jump in.
All right. I think the first few will probably move relatively quick. By the way, we're using PFF's mock draft simulator, so the rankings you see here are PFF's rankings, which in some ways do deviate from consensus. So we're going to try to make sure that we don't, strictly go off that and do anything crazy that doesn't align with what teams are going to do, because that is our goal here, is to predict what teams are going to do on draft night. This is not who we would pick. This is who we expect the teams to pick. So to start, that makes my first pick very easy,
Very easy.
because not only do I actually have come around to, I think this is what I would do at this point. So not only am I there with my opinion, but the Titans seem to have centered around Cam Ward. This has slowly been leaking out for a few
Yeah.
weeks now that like it's going to happen. I think Cam Ward was asked recently when he was like playing Fortnite on Twitch, like
Yeah, I was going to
who
ask
the
you about
best
that.
receivers in the NFL were, and one of them he named was Traylon Burks. So it's like, okay, well, I think we know
Yeah.
where this is going. I think this is a good pick for Tennessee. Their offensive line has been built up a lot over the course of this offseason, to where I actually think this is a pretty good environment for a young quarterback to come into. It's a good test for Brian Callahan to see if he does have what it takes to develop a quarterback after what was kind of a failed experiment with Levis for a couple years. So I think this makes sense. I think it fits the Titans' timeline, and I think Ward is a prospect that, while not a perfect player, is worthy of being a guy that goes with the top pick in the draft.
Yeah, I've come around on this too. I agree that if I were the Titans, with the moves that I've made to kind of solidify the offensive line and potential further upgrades in the draft, I would take him here as well. And I think that he has the talent to be worth that pick in a couple of years.
All right, John. The Browns are on the clock at number two.
All right, so the Browns, this is also probably not going to be groundbreaking. The Browns here, I think everybody is expecting them to take Travis Hunter. That's who I'll pick for them. Travis Hunter is viewed by many as the player in the draft because you're getting two players for one. Even if you don't see him as the consensus best receiver, even if you don't see him as your favorite cornerback, he could potentially play either both positions. The Browns definitely need receiver, and you can always use quality corners. I think Travis Hunter could potentially be very good at either of those positions. Um, I think if he's going to be successful, which most likely he will be, I think he's going to be a good player, but I think it's going to be important how they deploy him. So hopefully, if the Browns do make this pick, they've thought that through and they have a very thorough plan for what they're going to do with how he plays and he develops over time.
Yeah, yeah. This is I think once we get past these first few, it won't have already been spoiled by
Yeah,
reporting that has come out. So like these,
yeah,
yeah, like I think everybody's gonna have these as their first few picks. I have told you this offline. I think my hottest draft take this cycle is that if I was if I and it seems Cleveland has now come around to this. For a long time, people thought it was going to be Carter. Um, I think Hunter is the best player in the draft, and I would play him both ways. If I drafted
yeah,
him, I that doesn't mean I would immediately start out playing him every snap, but I genuinely think this guy's talented enough where he has a chance to make this work. And it may
yeah,
not be perfect early, but you think like he will not be as good as this. But you think about what Otani did in baseball, where it took a few years, it took some injury, getting over some injuries, kind of getting comfortable, and then after that, it just shot out of a cannon. Best player in the league. Even
mm-hmm.
Hunter's value will probably never reach that level, but I think this guy genuinely is one of the an elite receiver prospect. I think he is a
Yeah,
very good defensive back prospect, and I see no reason why if he picks one of those, he can't be elite at either of them. And then you get the added bonus of a potential two-way star. The stamina he displayed in college to be able to make this work for Colorado in games where he's playing like 130 snaps is just
yeah,
unbelievable. So I like this pick for
unprecedented. No
Cleveland.
one else could do it.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah,
why it's so hard to apply conventional wisdom to him is because he's
yeah,
already broken that. Like he has already done
mm-hmm.
things that no one else ever has. So
Yeah.
that will be a very interesting experiment. I am excited to see what Cleveland does with him. It sounds like he will major at wide receiver to start.
Yeah. I think that's where their bigger need is too. So
Yeah.
working him in as a nickel or a dime back and letting him, giving him full run at receiver early on, and then potentially as he has time to learn the playbook to get better technique, maybe move up the depth chart in the DB room.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the idea of him like playing some nickel early on
Yeah.
because he's not the biggest player anyways. So I think that might give them a chance to simplify things for him early and then let him get comfortable and then he can start taking some of those more difficult matchups.
Yeah.
Okay, next pick, the Giants. To me this is another one. Like I don't know that there's a ton that's been reported about what the Giants are going to do. I know like they worked out Shador recently. To me, this is like a very simple equation in how I
Yeah.
think about this, which is there are two blue chip, like top flight talent players in this draft, and one of them is still on the board. I don't care that you still have Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau. When Carter is sitting here, I think you take him. I think that's what the Giants will do. The biggest question to me here is like, would they go quarterback? I would be stunned if they took a non-quarterback that was not Abdul Carter.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the only question here. But I think, like with Cleveland, you see them take the blue chip guy at the top and maybe swing back around in which we're obviously not going to be mock drafting for rounds 2, 3 on. Cleveland, I think, is a team that has a very high chance of swinging back around and taking a quarterback in the second or third round. New York, I could potentially see doing the same thing. But I have them going Abdul Carter. I think you just have to take the player that is clearly more talented than the rest of the players available.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. He's the other blue chip player on the board. I think they pull the trigger on this. I don't think that having two good players at edge prevents you from taking a third one. You can always use more pass rush help, and ultimately, I think that they've come around to this. I think that they are a candidate, and other people have said this. I don't think this is news. They're definitely a candidate to trade up back into the first round. They think one of those other quarterbacks might go ahead of the second round.
Yeah.
Um, or if think one of those other quarterbacks might go ahead of where they're picking. So if they think one's going late first, they could try to jump to the mid 20s or so, the early 20s. So that'll be interesting to watch on draft night, which will obviously be simulating that here either.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if you wanted to do any trades. Depending on what happens here, I kind of like Jacksonville as a trade down opportunity. We could talk about that in more detail, but I think we probably should just stick with who's there for simplicity.
Yeah, I think it gets a little complicated figuring out what the
Yeah,
trade packages would be, and we can kind of mention that as we go. But
yeah,
yeah, I agree. I think Abdul Carter is probably the pick, and I think the right call.
yeah. All right, number 4, New England.
Number 4, this is another that seems to be kind of chalked in, and I think it is. I'll go ahead and point out it's eerie that there's almost a full consensus on what the top 4, if not the top like 5 or 6 picks are across most mock drafts, which makes me think that maybe it's not as rock solid as what everybody is projecting. But I think that this one makes a lot of sense. And I think it probably will be Will Campbell. I know that people have had worries about the arm length, the wingspan, but I think that he is a really smart player. I think he's a really tough player, and I think that he's the kind of tackle that Vrabel would want. He just kind of fits that mentality of what Vrabel wants from his team. And I think you got to obviously point out that they desperately need tackle. I mean, I
Yeah,
think it's
yeah,
it's a no-brainer here. Like it will be a tackle. I think it's probably Will Campbell. I guess it could be Mimbu or somebody else, but
yeah,
we'll have to see. I think Will Campbell here.
yeah. I think that my commentary on this pick would be I don't think it is as likely to be Will Campbell as like public sentiment seems to be, which is just
Mm-hmm.
like every mock draft has him there, which I understand why. Obviously, we just put him there as well. Um,
Yeah.
but I would not be surprised at all if Mimbu went here. I don't think Campbell is like a significantly better prospect than Mimbu, and he does have the arm length questions where depending on the team, I think teams will view that
Mm-hmm.
differently. And this is where things drop off, where there could be teams that have Will Campbell as a like the 15th player on their board,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not a crazy opinion. Like this draft gets very flat after you get past Hunter and Carter. So to me,
Yeah.
like all the 4, 5, 6, like everyone has those as like the same in all of the mock drafts. I mean, who knows? Ours may end up looking exactly the same as all the other mocks, but what I would say is I do not have a high degree of confidence that past pick 3 we know what's going to happen. I think there will be surprises, whether that's trade downs, whether that's just players that are selected that we don't expect. None of that would surprise me at all on draft night.
Yeah. And I think that with the so much consensus here at the top, I think things could get really crazy actually after the Carter pick, especially like you mentioned the Jags potentially trading down. If somebody wants to come up for Sand, if somebody wants to come up for Dart, I know that there has been, as crazy as that is, some Dart talk in the top 10. So I think that we could see some crazy trades and potentially as high as 4.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I would be surprised if anything happened before that, but past 3, I think things are open. I don't know if we're going to see any because I
Yeah.
don't know who you're coming up for at this point, unless you're just like a tackle hungry team that really wants to snag one of these top guys. But I do think the prices will not be significant if
Yeah.
teams are moving up from like 7 to 4. Like, I don't think the Patriots are getting a haul for that. They're probably collecting like maybe a future second or something
Yeah.
to move. Like, it's the prices are not
Not
going to be high this year.
going to be the multiple first round and mid round picks or anything
Yeah.
shocking.
So now I'm up
All right,
with
so we
the
got the
Jags.
Jaguars.
I This one's tough. I Mason Graham has been mocked here by everyone for forever. The Jags have a big hole on their defensive line in the interior that Graham could fill, and he is in that next tier of guys where it just makes perfect sense for the Jags. I don't. I am not sure that the Jags will view Mason Graham as the best player left in the draft,
Yeah.
but I have a hard time passing on him because I don't think there's anyone else that I would say is a tier above him, and he so clearly fits a need that they have that I think that's who I'm going to go with. I really was trying to find a way not to take him here, and I don't know, I just can't really make a logical case for it. I don't think they will take Genty. I don't know, they hired a very young, forward-thinking general manager this offseason, and they already have Travis Etienne. They've committed resources to the running back position already. I would be surprised unless ownership got involved that Genty would be the pick here. But I will go with Mason Graham here at pick 5.
Yeah, I actually want to look up really quick what the rookie contract for the 5th overall pick is. Because I think you bring up a good point. I've heard some of the people talking about this pick and talking about potentially Genty being here for the Jags. And I agree with you. I think hiring the young analytics-focused GM probably eliminates that. I can't really find the specific.
Yeah, and I think.
But I mean, by the time of the 5th-year option, you're looking at $20+ million, which is what Saquon Barkley is the only running back making that much.
Yeah.
I don't see any world where they pick a running back who is guaranteed to be on that track by the end of his rookie contract. Not with the way that they'll be, the way that he'll be looking at the draft.
And Genty is a elite prospect. He is.
Yeah.
He is in the Carter Hunter tier in terms of pure grade. You just have to take into account the positional value. I also think that, and who knows, again, as we go through all of these, it only takes one team to have an opinion for a guy to get taken, right? It doesn't take consensus. It takes one team liking a guy. I do think teams may be starting to learn the lesson that the time to invest resources in running back is when the rest of your roster is good, and not when you are rebuilding. The Giants and the Eagles with Saquon is the perfect example there. In one place, he was having okay seasons. Next place, he looks like the best running back in the NFL. You saw that with even Christian McCaffrey, the 49ers, a team with a great roster. The Ravens with Derrick Henry. I think teams are starting to learn that lesson. And to me, the Jags do not fall in the bucket of great roster that they can supplement with a running back at this point. I think we'll get to some of those teams not too long from now that can make that case, but I do not see Jacksonville as one of those.
So the Raiders, kind of transitioning from that, I think the Raiders are one of the teams that are potentially in the Genty sweepstakes. People have made the Pete Carroll connections, wanting the running back really high. The Seahawks did invest a lot of resources in running backs, multiple high picks. They'd use a first-round pick, followed by a second-round pick, followed by a third-round pick in consecutive years. So they invested a lot of resources at running back, and I think of it is the way that Pete views the position. I don't necessarily think it will be Genty. I'm still kind of considering here because I really could see this as a realistic pick for them.
I can throw a name out. Obviously, you're making the pick. This is a guy that he could fall to 20, so this is super risky. The Raiders need a lot of help at DB.
Yeah. You're probably going to say the name I'm thinking of.
I think Will Johnson falls into the category of guys that played so well early in college that we're starting to see a trend with these guys that maybe don't have the best final year, but were elite players in their first or second season in college football, that these guys will become good NFL players. I was a big Stingley guy coming out of LSU, and there was a lot of questions about his final year there, and he's now turned into probably, maybe some people could argue he's the second best corner in the NFL right now behind Surtain, with Sauce Gardner kind of falling off the past couple of years. I could see Will Johnson getting that same treatment, but but I know there's some top speed concerns, et cetera. Like, I don't know. But I would not write him off in the top 10.
Yeah, and he was one that I was considering here. They do need corner help, I think, pretty badly. He does have the 40 concern because he didn't run the 40. I think um, I think he is a really good player, and I don't think the Raiders are tied to only drafting big, strong, fast players anymore. That was kind of their MO for a long time.
Tom Brady, Michigan Wolverine. There's a connection.
There's the Michigan connection. I think I actually will take Will Johnson here, partially because I think that the Raiders, as much as I think they'll like Genty, I still don't think that they pick running back at 6.
I agree. I don't think they
There's
do.
a real chance, but I think he has other more likely landing spots that are still not that far off. And I think that they'll just pick a more valuable position. With the number 6 is still a really valuable pick and can get you a very good player.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it's going to be kind of hard for these teams to feel great about their selections in the top 10.
Yeah,
I don't think any of these guys I feel like amazing about. It's like, oh, this is a shoe-in, no-brainer, which is probably the case for Genty, he is that. It's just the positional aspect. But I think Johnson is a guy you can take in the top 10 and at least say the ceiling is enough where this guy could legitimately be like deliver as a top 10 caliber prospect. There's probably more questions with him than some of the other guys. But yeah, I like Johnson. I think he deserves to go in the top 10. So I would not blame the Raiders for this at all. All right. Number 7, I'll make this one quicker. I think this is like just a done deal. If he's there, I think this is Mimbu like pretty easily at this point. I think if the Jets get either of the top 2 tackles to fall to them at 7, like that's a win. That's how they need this to fall. I like Mimbu as a prospect, so that makes it easy. I think that's like the big question for the Jets is do either of these tackles make it down to 7? If not, I think you start to open up a lot more possibilities about what happens. Of course, I have not even mentioned quarterback for these teams yet. I probably won't mention quarterback for a while just because I don't like any of these quarterbacks enough to think it's going to happen. Shedeur Sanders, that's going to be an interesting question, but I do not think the Jets will take a quarterback here.
I don't think the Jets are in on the quarterbacks, and I think that they also realize their roster needs other pieces, and none of the quarterbacks are worth this pick.
Yeah. This is also where I think the tight ends start to come into play. Like I could maybe see Tyler Warren going here at 7. I think the Jets would rather shore up the O-line, but we'll see.
Yeah. When you consider tight end prospects, Bowers didn't even go this high. And Bowers was a generational tight end prospect. Generally, tight ends take longer to play and to be good on the field, even if they are good players, good prospects.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're worth the 7th pick. I think if they take Warren, it's probably a little bit of a mistake because you have more valuable positions that are available, and they need a tackle pretty badly. So I think Mimbu makes the most sense for them here. All right. Number 8 here, this is probably also a consensus pick, but there has been a lot of talk that they love this guy, and I think that it makes sense with their needs, considering their needs all around, and I think it's Jalen Walker. He's a little bit of a chess piece. You can move him around a little bit. They need good defensive players, so I think that this one does make sense for them overall. They just need defense. I'd be happy with any defensive player here for them just because of the need.
Yeah. This one I would expect to see a defensive guy just to highlight some of the other guys left. Like Janae Barron's left at DB. I think that's a little rich for him. You do have the 2 safeties. I don't expect them to go this early. And then you do have Mike
Green.
Yeah, you've got Mike Green as the other edge. I think that is possible. Shamar Stewart maybe is a possibility if they're really high on him. Keep in mind, like we said, this is like PFF specific rankings. They don't necessarily mirror consensus. So guys like Shamar Stewart, Michael Williams, like and Mike Green are probably the next most likely guys to come off the board here.
Yeah.
But I think Walker makes sense. I think he is a guy that I think has a very wide range. He's kind of a
Yeah.
tweener, but all the intel on him is super positive. So I think he probably is more likely to go in the early part of the first round. But yeah, I am very curious to see where he ends up. All right, Saints at 9. Is it time for Genty yet, or am I gonna wait? I don't think they will take a running back. I think they still would like to continue to see what happens with Kamara for a few years. Oh, man, I don't think they'll take Sanders. I don't love any of the secondary options at this point. I'm trying to think. I think I'm
they're
going to
in
go.
a tough spot with this pick.
Yeah. I think I'm going to go D-line.
Yeah.
It's just a question of where. Oh, man. I think Mike Green is my favorite player left of these guys. I don't know if you have any other suggestions.
I could see Shamar Stewart being one of the guys for them because of his testing. The Saints have generally been big on these linemen, these D linemen who test really well, even if they do seem kind of raw. Shamar Stewart didn't really well. He had plenty of pressures, just didn't convert that to sacks in college, but tested really well. So I could see that as a possibility. I do think Mike Green is also possible. I think he tested well too. If
I think you sold me on Stewart. He kind of reminds me of that like bigger, more physical, like that. You know, Cam Jordan's a guy that's been there forever. Like Stewart could maybe play in that type of mold. Green does have some off the field stuff. I don't know that teams are super concerned about it, but it also may cause him to drop a little bit. If it does cause him to drop, he's probably dropping much further than the top 10. Like so it's very hard to predict, but I like the argument for Stewart, so I will go with him at 9.
Yeah, I think that one could go a lot of ways. It most likely, if the board falls this way, I do agree that it's probably a D-line. And it could be Walter Nolan, it could be a couple of different players.
Yeah.
But I think Shamar Stewart just fits the mold of what they've looked for on the defensive line.
I agree.
Okay, the Bears. This one, we talked about Genty a couple times. I think if Genty is there at 10, I think it's hard for them not to pull the trigger. I think this is where the price starts to be worth it, especially with some of the other offensive weapons they have. I think they have a little bit of an established offense, and I think that if you drop him in that offense, it just helps Caleb Williams out. It just helps some of those other options that they have on offense out, take some pressure off of them, and I think that he could be really good in this offense. So I'm going to take Genty. I don't know for sure that he may not last this long. He may fall farther than this just because of running back value. But if I were there at 10, I would agree with this pick. He's one of the few. He's probably the only team in the top 10 that I could feel really good about him landing with.
Yeah, I think this is the first pick where I would. If you like made me defend it, I'm like, yeah, I feel good about this.
Yeah.
Like, this is fine. Before that, I would not love it for any of these teams, but I do think the Bears have enough where they can make an argument for this. I could see them being a trade back team because I think some of their other, like if you think about O-line, D-line, we're kind of starting to run out of those great O-line options. Like maybe, I think Kelvin Banks is probably the guy that would be most likely to go at tackle unless they're just a lot higher on any of these other guys. And then you think about like some of the D linemen left at this point. Like I still think it's a little early for where we expect Walter Nolan to go, although he is a very polarizing player. So yeah, I think this makes a lot of sense for the Bears at 10. I would not complain about this at all.
Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting point about them being a trade back candidate. I could definitely see that.
All right, San Francisco at 11. This one's fun.
Yeah.
Their roster actually now does have a lot of places where they need to add talent because they're just like, they're stars and scrubs team now, and a lot of those stars are getting older. I I don't know. Like there's some interior guys you could talk about here. My lean here is that they try to get the Trent Williams replacement with this pick because they don't anticipate that they will be picking this high very frequently. So I am going to go Kelvin Banks here and go tackle.
Yeah.
I think this makes sense. I think that this is like where his range probably starts is around 10 or 11. But for a team that prides themselves on, and has built this offense around having an elite left tackle, I think it does make sense to swing in a guy like Banks. So that's where I'm going to go at 11.
Yeah, and I think there could be a couple of different tackles that you put in this spot. But I think Kelvin Banks makes a lot of sense for what they do. And I think this is a realistic landing spot. I also wouldn't be shocked if they went defensive line. They really have kind of turned stars and scrubs roster, and they need to pick up someone here who is just a solid player. And Kelvin Banks would definitely fit that bill. Like, he's a very solid player, could grow into a really good one for them. All right. So I texted one of my friends. So one of my friends at law school is a big Cowboys fan who I now have on the clock at 12. He's been watching some different guys, and he watches only through the lens of who he wants the Cowboys to draft. So I texted him and asked him for a little input. And I agree with his suggestion. His number one guy that he would want to take, if they are available, is Ted McMillan.
Good.
And,
okay, this is who I was going to suggest, so we're on the same page.
Yeah, he's sitting here on the board. They need some wide receiver help just to take some focus off CeeDee Lamb. I think that he could be a really good number 2 option, take some pressure off him as well to not be that elite number 1 option. And I think that this would make their offense a lot better and a lot more stable this year.
Yeah, I think this is a no-brainer if he's there. I do not get the arguments for other guys being wide receiver 1 in this class. I think McMillan is clearly the most talented guy and does have some like physicality concerns, but is a very talented player at the catch point and has legit yak skills. I would like this for the Cowboys. I think this is the only receiver that I think is a guy worthy of a top 15 pick, but especially if he's on the board here, I think this makes a ton of sense. So yeah, definitely agree. All right, Miami, this is bad. So the question with Miami is like, do they get cute or do they take an offensive lineman? Like those are basically the two options. And at this point, I think that the question of do they get cute to me is answered by do they take Tyler Warren? I think he
Mike
is a
McDaniel
guy.
would sum him up so well, but
Warren is a guy like when you compare him to Loveland. I think Loveland is the more typical like tight end you would imagine. Warren is the guy I think that you have to scheme stuff up for more. Not to say he's a more limited player, but just he's so good at creating yards after the catch, at using his athleticism that you kind of have to like make him a structured part of your offense. But the Dolphins do that very well. Like I know McDaniel would draw up some awesome stuff for Warren. So the question is, do they feel good enough about getting a tackle or an interior offensive lineman in the second round that they're willing to come back around? Because the question is like, is a guy like Tyler Booker going to be available in the second round when they pick? Could they come back around and get Ariante Ursary, who's a tackle that a lot of people like? Well, some people are high on Marcus Imbo. I don't even know how you say his last name, but
I think it's Imbo.
Yeah, there are some guys.
I just heard that for the first time this week.
There are some guys down there that you could say maybe we can come back around and get this guy in the second round. My biggest problem with the Dolphins is they need multiple linemen. Like I think they could make an argument for just taking a guy in the first round and the second round. And so for that reason, I'm going to take a guy. This is kind of my first guy that like I am projecting will go higher than people expect. I'm going to take Josh Connerly from Oregon. This is a guy that a lot of people project as a guy that can play tackle at the next level. improved a lot as the season went on. I'm not going to pretend like I've watched a ton of Josh Connerly film. I have not. I'm more just going off things I've read, things I've seen. I could see. I think he is a guy that will go higher than people expect on draft night. I think most people expect him to be a late first round guy. I will predict that the Dolphins take a shot on him here at 13.
Yeah, you may have listened to this, but you listen to Nate Tice, right?
Yeah, him and his dad both really like
Yeah,
him.
yeah. Mike Tice was like really high. Connerly was his number one lineman in the draft, and I can definitely see it. I think that he's probably a guy that offensive line coaches are going to be higher on than just the pure draft scouts. So I could see him going higher than what we're expecting because these coaches get in the room and they kind of stump for the player. So yeah, I think this makes a lot of sense. Dolphins need line pretty desperately. So you were debating going tight end. This is another one that this is a common landing spot for Tyler Warren. I've taken a few consensus picks here. Hate doing it again, but I think it just makes too much sense for the Colts because they have a lot of players who they have a lot of positions that at least have someone there. They've really had nothing from the end position whatsoever. And I think that they make the argument that this will help their quarterback problem, where Anthony Richardson's been hurt and when he's been on the field has been inconsistent. This gives him a solid target to go to. Even if he's not there, Daniel Jones, when he's in, would definitely use Tyler Warren. So I'm going to go Tyler Warren here. I think it just makes too much sense to not do.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. My hot take for the Colts is I actually think Colston Loveland would be a better fit for their offense, and I think would pair better with Richardson. But I do think Warren is graded higher by most teams. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
I would not be surprised if Loveland went higher than Warren and potentially even here to the Colts. I just think that they are probably most likely to take a tight end first off the board.
No, that's if I in terms of like kind of out there draft predictions, that would be one of mine. Is Colston Loveland goes ahead of Tyler Warren. So yeah, but I do think Warren makes sense there. Okay, pick 15. This is like Mike Green, so easy, dude. The Falcons have not had an edge that can get after the quarterback, in like 10 years since since Vic Beasley had like one fake season. So I think this is like super easy. I think Green is maybe the best player left on the board at this point. You could make an argument for a few other guys, but especially at a premium position like edge, I think this is a no-brainer for the Falcons.
I can't really say it other than like Mike Green kind of feels like a Falcon.
Yeah.
And they desperately need pass rushers specifically. This one just makes much sense to not do. And this is what I was hoping you were going to do for them.
If this happens, I think this is like a big win for the Falcons.
Yeah. I think this is their ideal scenario.
Yeah.
All these other linemen and tight ends and receiver, Tet McMillan, get pushed up the board, and some of these defensive linemen fall to them.
Yep.
Cardinal, kind of interesting. I think they could go a lot of different directions with this. I think they're another. If Mike Green is there, they would consider it. They would consider Jedi Barron.
That was who I was going to throw out because they love, like Buda Baker plays a lot of that hybrid role. I think they play a flexible enough defense schematically that they would like a guy like this.
Yeah, and I think need corner pretty bad. I think I'm actually going to go a different direction for them, and I think I'm going to go Walter Nolan. I think they've not really had much from the defensive line for a couple of years now, and they are potentially one of these teams that could look to the upside of Walter Nolan. He's a gap shooter. He's a guy that is going to go really hard, sometimes get upfield too quickly, and not stay in his assignment. But I think they're going to chase that upside and potential disruptor in Walter Nolan, um, to help them out with their defensive interior problem. So maybe not uh, the most common pick, but
No, I think it makes sense. Like they need some of that explosiveness on their defense. Nolan is another guy. I think like him and Green, and Shamar Stewart, like Jalen Walker. I think these guys could go in like a million different orders, and none of it would surprise me. Nolan's probably the guy that I could
yeah,
see falling the most out of those because Nolan seems like the guy that will just like completely break the play, like just
yeah,
stop doing his assignment and try to go make something happen. I think some teams are just gonna hate that, but
yeah.
he does. He's very talented. He's a very explosive player. So yeah, I would not be surprised to see him come off the board at this point in the first round. All right, on to the Bengals. This is tough. I So in terms of D linemen that are left,
Yeah,
you've got Kenneth Grant, you've got Izaraku, Michael Williams.
I don't think they're a James Pierce fit because of the red flags and the character concerns. They
Yeah,
got burned on that. Um, I'm blanking on his name. He played at Alabama too. The receiver
Jermaine
last
Burton.
year.
Yeah,
Yes, Jermaine Burton. They got burned on that last year with Burton. I don't think they're the type to risk that in the first round. I think it probably is a D lineman here, just based on how the board has fallen.
yeah. I think I am gonna go. I was there, and yeah, I think I'm gonna go Michael Williams here. There's questions
Yeah,
about Trey Hendrickson and how long he's gonna be with that team. Williams is a guy I think that is a better run defender than pass defender. But you pair that with Hendrickson early on, I think that makes sense. And you hope you can develop Williams into a better pass rusher over time. The Bengals need any help, all the help they can get on defense. They've taken a lot of guys in their secondary in the past few years. I don't know that they will go back to that well again, even though they do need to improve there. So I think a D lineman does make sense. And to me here, like they are just, I think the Bengals are going to be in the same spot as the Falcons, like just hoping a couple of these guys find their way down to them at 17.
yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and I think Michael Williams makes a lot of sense for them, and I think he's going to be a good player. I think PFF is a little bit low on him, just based on how their board looks. Okay, 18 Seahawks. This is another one that I think you could go face. Um, so what I'm kind of thinking is I could see them going the Josh Simmons route. You get potential flexibility there with the guard tackle. You know, he's played a little bit of both. Probably would be a guard for them based on their interior line situation. Um, I don't think that they're a lock to take a lineman this high because they generally kind of leave offensive line for later in the draft. They don't like picking line in the first round.
Yeah, which has
Um,
worked out super great for their offensive line.
yeah, which it does mean that they're more likely to take one here, I think, because they need it a lot. I think they have a hole at receiver too.
Yeah.
And I think there are a few guys you could consider here. Um,
I would be surprised if they went receiver after signing Cup. Even though I think long term they'd need help, I just would be
yeah,
surprised if they invest that many resources.
yeah, I think you're right, and I think Josh Simmons probably does make sense for them. I could also see Gray's able, but I'm gonna go Josh
So
Simmons
that's
here.
that's where I was gonna say I won't, I'm not gonna veto whatever you say. I do think, and I guess Simmons is a guy that has some flexibility too, but I think Zabel to me makes sense here because they need somebody that can play inside for the short term. Like both their tackle spots are locked up,
Yeah,
and that's why I feel like you've seen Zabel here mocked a lot is because he can kick out
yeah,
and like teams think he can might potentially play like four spots on the O line. Simmons probably is like the higher graded prospect though.
yeah. And I think that it probably comes down to these two. I wouldn't be shocked if it was a receiver, honestly, but I think it most likely will be one of these linemen.
Hmm.
Um, and I think Zabel would make a lot of sense for them too. But we'll go Simmons here just to be interesting.
Yeah, I could definitely see that happening. Okay, Bucks are on the clock. I think we're starting to get into the range where some of these guys at worse positions will start to come off the board, like Jahad
Yeah.
Campbell, Johnny Barron, Malachi Starks, like all very good players, just not the positions that you may be looking for. Um, Man, I really don't know where I want to go here. See, I kind of love Jahad Campbell here as like a long term
Yeah.
replacement for Levante David. The question to me though is like, is the secondary bad enough where they just have to find somebody to play now? Because I think they probably could add a safety or a corner. And I think for that reason, I'm
Yeah.
going to go Jade Barron here because I think they could
Okay.
use the positional flexibility from him. And it's a pressing enough need where I have a hard time thinking they're going to plan for the future over getting somebody that can come in now and really contribute at a high level.
Okay. Yeah, that is interesting. I think that most people have them going Jihad Campbell, which I think makes a lot of sense. But I think that you make a really good point about Jade Barron's flexibility. You know, you could play him at several different spots in the secondary, and you can trust him to be good at any of those spots. Um, and I think almost any team would be looking for that. So I would not be shocked. All right, Broncos. Broncos, I see them going offensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
Um, I think they're going to try to get more weapons out there for Bo Nix. Uh, this is a one that if Ted McMillan falls, a lot of people have have him going here to the Broncos. I personally don't think he falls that far. He might not even make it to 12 like he did in our mock.
Yeah. I don't think
Um,
there is like a 0% chance that he goes in like the top five. I will, I think I would
yeah,
be surprised, but yeah, I have a hard time thinking he makes it down to the 20s.
you know, give me Emeka Abuka here.
Ooh, okay.
I think that he is the I don't think he's the flashiest receiving option, but I think he's a hard worker. I think he's going to work the middle of the field really well, and I think that he is a guy that Sean Payton's going to like a lot. Potentially fit really well with Bo Nix's strengths. Um, yeah, I think I'll go with Mecca Ibuka here.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. I was curious to see like were you going to go receiver? I know Loveland's still on the board, so that's like the other place I think
Yeah,
you
I
could
think
go.
that's a possibility as well.
Yeah. I would like that for the
Potentially
Broncos.
running back, but
Yeah. That's Omarion Hampton could definitely go here.
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Steelers are on the clock. I don't think a quarterback's going in the first round other than Ward. So I'm not taking one here. This is probably the last
Okay.
spot that you would see one go. Um, but I am going to leave that for now. Running back is a need. I definitely think Omarion Hampton makes sense here.
Yeah,
So that's
I can
one
see
I
that.
am definitely going to heavily consider. They certainly could use to add a wide receiver, depending on whether or not George Pickens defects from the team by the time the season starts. They could always use an O lineman, but I think I am gonna go with Omarion Hampton here. I I think Hampton is like a very very good prospect. Like I
Yeah,
definitely think he's gonna go sometime in the first round just because I think teams are gonna love his talent. Pittsburgh obviously lost Najee Harris. I don't think they want Jalen Warren to be like the number one guy that takes carries throughout the year. I think that they don't trust him to stay healthy if that's the type of volume that he has to endure. So I'm gonna go with Hampton here. Anyone else that you would throw out before I lock it in?
no, this is really what I was thinking for them. I could see them potentially going like a Kenneth Grant.
Yeah.
Um, maybe a Trey Amos, but yeah, no, I don't think that anyone else really fits them here, other than I have seen James Pierce in this spot as like a um, you trust the locker room, you trust that Tomlin is gonna like keep him on the straight and narrow, and he's a good pass rusher. But I think that running back probably makes the most sense for what they want to do offensively. And Omarion Hampton, I think, does get overshadowed a little bit by Genty. So I like
Yeah.
the pick.
It would be pretty funny if like this is like almost exactly where they took Najee. So it would be funny if
Yeah.
like the year that they don't re-sign Najee, they come right back around. But I do think I think Hampton is a better prospect than Najee was. So I could see them pulling the trigger there. Okay,
Yeah.
Chargers. I feel like there's an obvious one here. We'll see if you go with it for
So,
many reasons.
so I think that there are two obvious ones, just based on who is the head coach of the Chargers. I could definitely see this being a Colston Loveland landing point. I'm leaning a little more towards Kenneth Grant.
Interesting.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, but I could see either of the Michigan players on the board who are highly rated going here. Or were you thinking Colston Loveland?
I can see Grant though, and I honestly think these might be outside of like Campbell, who I think is probably a better prospect than Grant. These are a couple of the top players left on the board.
Yeah, and I think I want to go Grant because I think that they need that interior line help, and I think that Grant is a good player, and Harbaugh is going to fit too much. Like he's familiar with these Michigan players. He definitely likes his Michigan players. So
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. Okay. Man, I'm surprised. I did not think Loveland was going to make it this far, but
I
it
didn't
does show
either.
you like there's only a few teams that really are like going to want a tight end. And if they pass, like he could fall.
He could fall. Yeah, I still think a couple of potential landing points for him at the end of the first round here.
Yes, definitely.
So I don't think he's falling out, but it'd be Tyler Warren who's falling.
Yep. Okay. Packers at 23. They could use secondary help for sure. I don't know that Jair Alexander's going to be around much longer. So you've got like a Malachi Starks, but more of a safety type. I think they'd probably be more likely to target a corner here. Then you have like I don't think they're going to take a wide receiver in the first round as much as some people may want them to, especially if it's
They haven't
not.
done it in 20 years.
Yeah, especially if it's not McMillan. Like I would be surprised if they took any of those other guys. They could go D line, O line. I actually think this is a tough one.
This is a pretty tough spot for
Okay,
them.
you know what? No. Okay, I can find a reason for this. Jeff Halfley, former head coach at Boston College. We've got Donovan Ezraku sitting here. I do think edge is like the
Yeah.
position I would see them most likely to target anyways. So this is not just like a put the head coach with the former player or put the defensive coordinator with the former player thing. Like I think
Yeah.
edge makes sense. So that is my logic here. I could see the Packers doing a bunch of different things. Like I think this is a hard team to figure out, but that's where I'll go for them.
Yeah, I think that this is kind of the direction I was leaning for them. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think they could definitely use edge help. I think they would take a corner if there was one on the board still who fit what they wanted to do. I think this is a Jade Barron. If he falls a little bit, this is a good landing spot for him. Um,
Yeah. This area to me is
because of
like
the
Will Johnson's
positional
floor.
flexibility. Definitely, definitely. All right.
While you think about this, I'm turning my light on.
Yeah, I was going to suggest you do that. Yeah, so I think the Vikings are in an interesting spot. I think they probably look secondary. This is maybe a good Malloy Stark's landing spot. He's fallen pretty far. This is probably farther than he falls. Although, again, looking at it, he really does fit the mold of a true safety more than anything else. So that probably does lose him a little
Yeah. But they
stock,
could take a safety.
draft stock. They definitely could use a safety, and I'm tempted to go that direction for them. I think I actually will. I think there are a couple corners they could consider. I like Ray Amos a lot. He
Yeah.
played at Alabama, obviously. I transferred to Ole Miss. He was a great player when he played. He just got kind of stuck behind some top guys on the depth chart at Alabama. So, but give me Malachi Starks here. I think that the talent and just overall evaluation is probably too good, despite being a safety, which you pointed out they can use.
Yeah. Trey Amos, former Billy Napier recruit at Louisiana Lafayette before
Yeah,
transferring to Alabama. So I have to throw that in. But
good player.
yeah. The Texans are next up here, which, by the way, I also think it's funny. This is like for the Vikings, the Lewis Cine pick, Georgia safety, that did absolutely nothing for them. So maybe they go back to the well.
Maybe they go away from Georgia safeties.
Yeah, we'll see. That'll be interesting to see what they end up doing. But, okay, Houston. This one, like, if it's not O-line, I don't know what.
I think there's an obvious one here for them. But
Yeah, to me, I think Zabel is
yeah,
the fit here because, like we talked about, he's got the positional versatility that you need. I think he's the last like clear first round prospect left that
yeah,
from the O line. Their O line needs to be completely reshuffled. So taking a guy that's talented enough to like excel at guard or center, but has the flexibility to move around, I think makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I think this one's pretty simple.
yeah. I think this is almost a no-brainer if he's still here at this pick. I think you could pencil it in.
Yeah. Okay, the Rams at 26, who I will note going into this tried to move heaven and earth to trade up for Brock Bowers last year. Will they be able to restrain themselves a second time from taking a tight end?
You know, I was thinking about this, and I think that pick makes a lot of sense. Some people are mocking them quarterbacks. They're giving them Sanders. They're giving them Dart. Whoever. I don't think they do that. I think that this is a win now position for the Rams. I think they're going all in. They know they've got 1 or 2 years left of Stafford, and they have a history of doing this in the past. Of kind of like, we know we have this window. We're pushing the chips in the middle. We're going for it. We're not going to draft a developmental quarterback, and waste a first round pick on that right now when we have a legitimate chance at a Super Bowl window. So I think like Wilson Loveland here to give them this weapon over the middle, legitimate blocker too, great frame, can do some things for them in the game as well. So Colston Loveland here for them.
Yep. I think they will run the card up if that's the option for them
Definitely.
at 26. Like that's a huge win if they can make
Definitely.
that happen. All right. Ravens are up. By the way, Jahad Campbell has fallen a ton here. I think he's a very good player. Like that would surprise me if it
I
happens.
think he probably goes before this, but I think once you get past like 19 at the Bucks, there aren't a lot of like obvious landing spots for him.
Yeah. All right. Ravens are up. I don't love the O-line options here. Like Donovan Jackson, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't love those options. They could definitely use a D lineman, and then they could also use some secondary help. So from secondary, you still have Trey Amos available. That's a guy that I would heavily consider here. I think that makes a lot of sense for them. And then from the D line perspective, let's see who we've still got left. You got Pierce. I don't think they would take Pierce.
I don't think they would take Pierce because I don't think he's a fit in that locker room. They don't really take these character shots this high.
And he's also, they love the like bigger, more physical edge guys like Zadarius Smith. that type of player. Pierce is like just pure speed. I don't think Pierce goes in the first round with the character stuff plus the like pass rush specialist stuff. Honestly, I think the two guys I'm in between the most here are Nick Scorton and Derek Harmon.
Okay.
Scorton is a tough one because he was awesome at Purdue 2 years ago, and then A&M made him put on like 30 pounds and
Yeah.
was clearly not playing like in the way he should be used. I think if a team gets him in the second round, they are going to be very happy with the player they get as long as they deploy him in the way he was used at Purdue. But it still is a big uncertainty because he definitely did not play like a first rounder last year.
Yeah.
You know what?
I
I'll
will.
do it. Why not? Unless you got thoughts.
No, I understand both of those. I think both of those make sense. Um, I wouldn't rule out either of the Alabama players on the board.
Yeah,
Campbell, obviously not an obvious need for them, but a really talented player. The Ravens are a classic best player available type team. I wouldn't rule out Booker for them just because of the type of player that they usually draft on the offensive line. And
yeah,
Booker's, tough, physical. He didn't test well, but they don't really care about that. And you got to acknowledge the Alabama to Ravens pipeline that has existed since Ozzie Newsome, former Alabama player, was their general manager. Still kind of exists there. So, but I see both of your point. I could see Scorton or or Derek Harmon being the type of player that they like, that they want
yeah.
to draft.
I think I'm going to go Scorton also just because I think he's going to go higher than people expect. So I feel like this is a way of reflecting that. I think Zabel, if he's there, would also make a lot of sense for the Ravens. Could definitely see them doing
Yeah,
that if he's there, but I'll go Scorton.
definitely. Definitely. All right. The Lions. All right. I think they are most likely looking also in the same tier of pass rusher. Um, I don't think they're afraid to take risks. So, they could just give us something completely off the wall. I saw this in a mock the other day. I don't remember which one it was. I like the reasoning a lot, and I'm gonna follow it up here. I'm gonna give them Pierce. At this point, they have a uh, very unified locker room. They have a clear direction that they're taking their franchise. They need help on the defensive line at pass rush. And Pierce is the kind of like high upside pass rusher that could really give them a boost there. And I think you trust the other guys in that locker room to kind of keep him on the straight and narrow. I think that this is one of the few spots him going in the first round I wouldn't hate, that I could kind of understand.
Yeah, I think if there's a place for him to go, this or like Philly are probably the two spots that
Yeah,
make the most sense for him. Because if he does develop his pass rushing ability, he could be a 10 sack type of player.
definitely.
So someone will end up taking a swing on him for sure. All right, Washington at 29. They're in a really interesting spot because
Yeah, they
they do
are.
not feel like they should be picking at 29, but that's where we are. They definitely could continue to add on the D line. There's still, I think there's a bunch of guys that could end up going here with like Tyleek Williams, Derek Harmon, some of these other guys I think are more second round guys, but could potentially jump up into the first round. But I'm curious here about wide receiver too.
Yeah,
I think Washington could use adding another receiver. Even though they got a lot of production out of their receiving room last year, they were playing guys that like De'Ami Brown was getting a lot of snaps for them, who's a fine player, but not some elite guy. Corner would be another spot for them. I don't know if they're. I
yeah.
mean, Trey Amos is probably a guy that would make sense for them here, but I think I'm going to go with Matthew Golden. I do think Golden goes in the first round, and I think he is the ideal wide receiver 2 for a team. I don't want him to be my wide receiver 1, but in an offense where McLaurin is eating up a lot of the wide receiver 1 volume, those deep targets, I think Golden can operate well in this Commanders offense that puts a lot of trust in Jaden Daniels. So any objections to the Golden pick here?
No, I think that one makes a lot of sense. I could see Burden being a good fit, just on and I think it does kind of depend on like what kind of player they want.
Yeah,
Uh, I think they're probably going receiver here just to give Jaden Daniels another target. I could see Burden being that like high upside, like dynamic playmaker, ball in his hands kind of guy. I could see Ibuka if he's here being that like reliable chain mover type. I think they have a lot of ways they could go. All right, the Bills. So the Bills, this has put me in a tough spot because I was thinking for a while that they are probably a cornerback landing spot. We have a couple of corners here on the board that I think they'd be considering. Siobhan Revelle, I think, is a really good player. Trey Amos, I've mentioned a couple times, being a really good player, and I could see those fits working out really well. They also give me the vibe of a Jihad Campbell is still sitting here,
yeah.
and he has fallen this far. I don't think he would fall any farther. I think that they would run the pick in. He's the kind of linebacker that they like, where he can drop into coverage. He also gives you the run stopping and pass rush flexibility, where you can do a lot of things with him. So I think that if Campbell were here, this is almost a no doubt, and that they would address corner in the second round.
I agree, and I think there's guys that they could come back around to the second round at corner
Yeah.
that are reasonable picks for them. I think Trey Amos might be the most likely guy to end up there
Yeah.
for Buffalo, because I don't think Campbell would be on the board in most scenarios, but for this scenario, I think that's definitely the pick. Okay, Kansas City's up. I guess we got to start by talking about the O line.
Yeah.
There's plenty of room to rebuild that. I think this is where like Donovan Jackson could be relevant. You saw this is a guy that was playing guard and kicked out to tackle for Ohio State. Kansas City just lost a guy that was able to do that for them last year in Joe Tooney after trading him away. So I do think he makes sense. Maybe there's a D line replacement somewhere. We're kind of in that same dilemma here where there's a bunch of these D linemen that I could see going, whether it's like Tyleik Williams, Derek Harmon, if anybody's high on these other players, maybe they go wide receiver. I think I am gonna stick with O line here, and I will go with Donovan Jackson. I think that makes sense for them.
Yeah. That's almost the necessary spot that they put themselves in. They continue to need help on the offensive line, and I think that there are a lot of players they could consider there, but none that make a ton of sense. I think this is a common like Zabel. If they fall, if one of those
Yeah,
guys falls, then they're going to draft him immediately. But I think that you make a good Jackson being a guard kicked out to tackle, flexibility that would fit really well with Kansas City. All right, and now we have the Eagles, who, they're a common best player available team as well. So I think that they could go a few different directions with this. I think this is a spot where, like, if either of those tight ends fall, the Eagles would be a very likely landing spot for them. If Malachi Starks fall, they would be in position for him. Yeah, let's see here.
this is tough.
So I think that they just won the Super Bowl on the back of this pass rush. A lot of it generated from the interior. They lost a little bit of that in the offseason, and I think that they're always reloading on the defensive line. And a lot of people have kind of made these connections that they could potentially take an edge. They could take a defensive lineman. Give me Derek Harmon here
Yeah.
as just a really solid interior player with some pass rush upside and ability. I think that that fit makes a lot of sense for them.
Yep.
I
Yeah,
thought
I
about
think
Amos here, but
yep. I think Amos makes sense there. I think Harmon makes sense. Um, I was hoping to still have the players left on the board that we could talk through here on the screen. Um, we already got the results here popped up. We can talk
oh
through
yeah,
some of the takeaways from this, and then we can mention here. I think we'll talk about some of like the best players left on the board that did not get picked in the first round. Uh, first of all, any like lessons or takeaways from this as we went through that pop out to you?
you kind of mentioned this, but the tight ends, Jihad Campbell, there are a couple of players that I think have a few fits in the first round. And if those teams don't take those players, then they could fall pretty far. Um, I think that they are also potential players people could be trading up for in the late 20s, uh, in the back part of the first round. And I think the quarterbacks are still a talking point. You know, we didn't have any quarterbacks going here at the end of round one. The Steelers are still a landing spot for one potentially. I think that you could see a trade up into the last half of the first round. Teams trying to get that fifth year option on a guy if the eval is really good. But overall, you know, Sanders' star has kind of fallen uh, quite a bit during the draft process, and I think there's a real chance he does fall out of the first round.
Yep. Yeah, I think that the non-premium positions here, I think there are so many teams in the first round that have to fix needs at like O line or D line, where it's very hard for them to get somewhere else. Like you start having to get down to these
Yeah.
very good teams before it starts to make more sense. But someone probably will take these guys just because they love the player. But yeah, that I definitely now do feel a little bit worse. Like if you had asked me going into this exercise, like is Campbell going to go in the top 20? I would have said, oh, for sure. Like there's no way. And now like I
Yeah.
definitely feel worse about that. I think the
Yeah.
run on linemen in the teens is interesting. Like 11
Hmm.
tackle, 13 tackle, 15, 16, 17, 18. Like there's a bunch of those guys going there where if you're a team like the Chargers or the Steelers who is trying to wait on some of those guys, that's gonna be a long night trying to wait that out to pick up one of
Yeah.
these linemen because you're gonna have a lot of teams in front of you hoping to scoop them up. Yeah, I think those are the main things. To me, like once you get past three, things really open up. And then late first round, I think there are a ton of guys that could get selected at that point.
Yeah.
Past Loveland, there's not really a single guy that. Oh, I mean Campbell's down there obviously, but past Loveland, there's not really a guy that I feel super confident that gets taken in the first round. Okay, I think we lost John for a second, but we should be able to get him back soon. Let's move now to some of the guys that were not selected in this draft. So, from the wide receiver side, Luther Burden is one of the players that was not picked. I actually don't see him going in the first round. John, I've got you back now. I've moved to players that did not get picked in our draft. Starting with some of the wide receivers, I think Luther Burden is probably the main guy that didn't get picked. I actually don't think he goes first round. Like that was not a surprise to me that he did not get taken, but I could easily see a team taking a swing on him in the late 20s. Any
Hmm.
standout guys here that did not get picked in the first round that you want to call out?
Yeah. I think Shadur is the obvious one that we've talked about, just depending on the eval. You mentioned Burden. I could see him going. Um,
I think Nick Emanowari is one that we really didn't talk about at all. I don't think he
yeah.
goes first round, but the traits are outrageous. I don't think he's a first round caliber player. I would be surprised if he went first round, but I do think you see a lot of mocks with him in the first round. So he is one to call out, but I feel good about not having him in. In terms of like the O line and D line, there are a bunch of guys that could get thrown in. I mean, you saw us like looking through that list as we go there with like the Omar Norman Lots, the
Ariante Ursary, and
so many of those guys.
Williams,
Williams at Ohio State.
Landon Jackson.
There's a bunch of those players that could end up going late first, but I don't think I'd be surprised about any of those guys making it in or not.
I would not. Actually, one that we didn't really talk about is the Ohio State running backs, Trevion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, both kind of potentially mentioned in that first round tier. We had a couple of high-profile people say that there will be at least 3 running backs picked in the first round. I think if either of those does go, it's probably most likely to be Trevion Henderson. But I think you could put those kind of on the radar.
Running back going in the first round. I would
too.
Dude, it is the deepest running back class I can ever remember. I would much rather just take a guy in the 3rd or 4th round than use a first round pick on a guy outside of Hampton or Genty. I do not think that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. But I think that, if you have these have the eval on them and they like the player a lot, they might be trying to get him in those last few picks of the first round. We could see some of those teams trading out. As kind of it happens pretty often with those last few picks.
Yep. Other than that, I think the only other guys that I would mention as potential first round guys are Noel and Higgins, the Iowa State receivers. I think that probably only happens if guys like Golden get pushed up the board a little bit. If teams take them earlier, you could see one of these teams come back around at the end of the first round and take one of those guys. But I think that comes down a lot to what happens earlier in the first round. But those guys to me are both like interesting, round 2 prospects that I could see jumping into the end of the first round. So anybody else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, I think that covers it pretty well. I think most of the guys that we haven't talked about don't have that good of a chance. Obviously, anyone could go. It just takes one team to fall in love with somebody. But I think we covered most of the guys that have a real chance of going in the first round.
All right. That'll do it for the mock draft episode. Like I said, this was recorded on Monday night. So if anything we said is outdated at this point, then just ignore those pieces. But hopefully most of this will hold strong until draft night comes around. So excited for that on Thursday night. John, thanks again for joining. Hopefully, we have not recorded all the quarterback a yet. Hopefully at this point they are out, but still getting around to those. So thanks, John.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. This was a fun exercise again this year.
All right, that'll do it for this episode. Thanks again, everybody, for watching, and we will catch you soon.